COVID-19 is hitting the world's most rural, remote communities the hardest, especially because they are already struggling to survive day to day. Add to that, a health problem too. Joining us now to discuss the Hunger Project and how it's uniquely placed to rapidly respond to COVID-19 is Melanie Noden, the CEO. Melanie, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me here.
This is a really difficult time for so many countries around the world. We live in a first-class health system, but we kind of expect that everybody else around the world does too, and that's just not the case.
Absolutely agree. Look, COVID is really impacting people in developing countries significantly. Look, the numbers are small, 193,000 cases across Africa and Southeast Asia so far, but we know that's just the absolute tip of the iceberg. The Brookings Institute estimate the numbers in developing countries are about 39 times higher than that.
Wow.
Because there's a lot of underreporting and also a lot of a lack of testing in those countries.
Is it also a lack of putting in the lockdowns and those sorts of things because it just won't work?
Look, in some countries, some of the countries where we work, there's been really strict lockdowns, and that's varied to places like Malawi, where they've just said they actually appealed to the court and said we can't lock down, people will starve. So the picture in developing countries is that people are living in extreme poverty across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. There are 629 million, or a majority of the people living on less than $1.90 a day. And what that means is locking people away that are reliant on daily wages just to get food to eat each day. People will starve. And also the other challenges they've got is that we're being told to wash your hands with soap and water, but only 15% of people in sub-Saharan Africa have access to water. And the health systems themselves are just not going to cope. Across the whole of Africa, there are 2,000 ventilators compared to 170,000 in the US. So although we're all facing the same virus, and it's a huge challenge for all of us, the impact it will have in developing countries is going to be catastrophic. We really we're facing a health crisis globally, but in developing countries, we're now facing a humanitarian crisis.
What do we do to fix the situation?
Well, look, there are some simple things that we can do. At the Hunger Project, we do have a 5-point plan. The first one is to raise awareness. Look, knowledge is the most impactful thing that we can do in Australia. Staying in, social distancing, hand washing, staying safe. All of those sorts of lessons are really important to communicate. And at the Hunger Project, we've trained up 500,000 leaders across 13,000 communities, and they're already in place in those communities right now. And they're raising awareness. They're going out with the simple lessons that we've all learned to ensure that people in the remotest communities know how to keep safe. Also expanding access to hand washing stations. So with only 15% of people with access to water and soap, making sure that we enable people to have access to that by putting in place really simple technology, tippy taps, which are just a container on a frame operated by your foot. And we put in, I think in the first week in Benin, we put in 2,200 tippy taps so that people could wash their hands in their homes and in key public places. I think probably the third thing we need to do is make sure that we are diagnosing and isolating people with COVID. In Malawi, they've only had 75 tests per million people compared to in Italy, where we've had 48,000 tests per million people. So we do need to be able to diagnose and isolate people who have COVID to protect everyone else. I think also for the people who are on the brink of destitution, we need to ensure that those people, particularly in the remote areas, get access to any public safety nets in those countries. And if they can't get access, the Hunger Project are doing food parcels and making sure that people have access to their basic needs, but also at the same time trying to get them to innovate to preserve their livelihoods, as we are in Australia, still doing that same thing, ensure that we do the most that we can to preserve what we've got. And I think lastly, promoting community cohesion. In Australia, we've all come together, and I think it's been really quite inspiring to see how we have done that. But we need to, in developing countries, stop stigma and discrimination that can happen through not understanding COVID. But also gender-based violence is having an even more significant impact in developing countries. When communities, the poorest of the poor, vulnerable. Child marriage will go on the increase. So making sure that women are safe. So I think it is really mobilising the communities, as we have in Australia, with the right sort of knowledge and making sure they have access to resources.
Well, I guess like what you're
safe.
saying there, Melanie, if I can just jump in, is there's already been
Sure.
so much going on in Africa that you've been dealing with as well. We use the term pivot far too often here in Australia and in the West when we talk about companies having to reinvent themselves. Talk to us about how COVID has impacted what you do, because obviously the word hunger doesn't seem to have much to do with COVID, but you found yourself essentially having to deal with this, much as an Amazon or a supermarket has had to suddenly shift away from being the provider of fresh fruit and vegetables right to providing hand sanitizer and soap and toilet paper.
Sure. Look, at the Hunger Project, we're in quite a unique position in that all of our work is about enabling and empowering people living in hunger to be the solution. So our work is all about enabling them with the knowledge, skills and resources that they need to take action. And so we do programs, whether it be in health, in water and sanitation, in agriculture, and in microfinance, just to name a few. So a lot of our work is already about knowledge and skills. So, and we also have 500,000 volunteer leaders already trained up. So we've got the social structure already in place to reach 16.5 million people. So for us, we pivoted very quickly. Within the first week of us going into shutdown in Australia, we were already out there, translating messages from WHO into all the different languages, into storyboards, getting them out to those 500,000 leaders so that they can take action immediately in their communities.
Wow.
And these are communities where people, many people only have basic literacy. They don't have access to the internet. So imagine all that information we got from the internet, that's not available. So to reach those most remote communities, to keep them safe, we rapidly went out and did that. So that was our first response. As I said, in those first weeks, we installed thousands of tippy taps. But then also now we're really focusing on the fact that when our country director in India said to me last week, we will have more people die from hunger and starvation if we don't act than from COVID in our community.
Melanie, really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And look, we're doing a campaign at the moment, Stay In, Reach Out. We're inviting people to spend the money that they can't spend at the pub or going on a holiday, to invest it in reaching 16.5 million people. So people, please go to thp.org.au to stay in, reach out, and please, if you can't go out and have that beer at the pub, please invest it in other people's potential, because we'll only solve COVID-19 by reaching out to the poorest of the poor in developing countries. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, just say the website once more.
thp.org.au. Stay in, reach out. Please invest what you can't spend on a beer. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that is